When using the ClickerPad system for a risk assessment workshop, there are two different methods of voting for your workshop participants. They can either vote using a ClickerPad voting keypad, or they can vote using smartphones or other internet enabled devices such as laptops. There's no installation required for them to do that online method of voting. It's all browser based, so all that they'll need is a good internet connection. And of course, you, as the person running the workshop, would need a really stable internet connection too. However, when it comes to the software, there are more choices to make because there are three versions of the software available, so three different levels. We tend to recommend ppvote Matrix. It was written specifically with risk in mind, and it'll give you an output like the one that you're seeing here. So this heat map has been generated automatically at the end of the voting process. I've just voted on 4 risks on this one to give you an idea of what those outputs look like. With the other levels, they're not going to generate your heat map for you. So I suppose the first question is, do you already have a spreadsheet that you use that can generate your heat maps, or perhaps another piece of software? If you do, you may not need the matrix level software because you could just put your data into your existing application. But let's have a quick look at why this one is the sort of tool of choice amongst risk practitioners. So we've got various views, and this is fairly dynamic. We can decide as we go along which view we want to see, and we can filter things out as well. So this one's got a background image heat map. If you've got an image that you particularly like that works for you or that your participants are used to seeing, you can replace this background image with your own image file. Equally, we could turn that off. So if I turn off the background picture, and we've just got a white background. We can brand this up a bit as well. So we can change the colours and fonts, we can add a logo to this, and we can use all of your corporate colours if needed. We tend to, by default, use traffic lights for obvious reasons. So what we're seeing here is our impact. I'll just close this list down so we can see the impact, we can see the likelihood, and then the colour-coded circles. That's the third assessment, which in my example is control effectiveness. So item C, we've voted that good control. So it's pretty high on the impact and likelihood. However, we've got good control. Item B, although it's sitting a little lower on impact and likelihood, what we're seeing here is red for poor control. And then the amber means we have some control, but perhaps that could be improved for these. What we can do as well is we can add what we call overlays. So this again is user definable. You decide what colour each area of this grid is, and equally you decide what your scale is. So all of this wording can be changed. It doesn't have to be 1 to 5. So the process can be built around your existing assessments rather than you having to fit in with how matrix is done as standard. So that's some of the things you can turn on and off. I'm just going to put it back to plain white, and I'm going to turn that boundary off, and we've got an absolutely plain background now on our XY. What we can do as well is we can zone in on particular risks. So in this example, I guess B is probably what we'd consider the most worrying. So I'm going to press B on my keyboard. If I'd given risk B a proper risk description, you would now be seeing that at the top. In my risk list, I just entered it as risk B, so that's all I'm seeing here. But we can now focus on that without considering the noise of all the other risks. I only had 4, so it was quite tidy, but had I had 50 risks on here, it would have been a much busier plot. What we might want to do is press B again on the keyboard, and we can have a look and see how much consensus we've got. So each of these plots is an individual voter. So we've got a group of people here that are very worried about risk B, but we've also got some people over here that feel quite differently. So what we might do at this point is discuss risk B in greater detail, and perhaps we'd go in and re-vote that item after discussion. So if I right click on item B, I can choose to re-vote right from the first assessment. when I run these, this is going to be exactly as it would be if we started the process with no data at all. I just voted on some so that we could start at the end and see that heat map. You might notice at the moment it's saying votes cast keyboard. Just to explain that, today for the purpose of this video, I'm just using my computer keyboard for speed to vote rather than me sitting trying to cast multiple votes per question. So this wording is again down to you. That's just my example wording. This could say whatever you like. We could be seeing a logo here, and we could have different font colours and sizes here as well. But so let's cast a few votes on this one, and I'm going to vote risk B as being very high impact. So we look first at the first criteria, and then we'll move on to the next. And we can have up to 9 assessments. I coincidentally happen to have cast 9 votes, but we could have 9 different assessments if needed. So if you do want to add things like velocity, or perhaps you want to do inherent scores and then separately residual scores, you can do that. As soon as you've received your votes, you can immediately show a graph if you want to. You can switch this off if you don't want to show it at this point, but it can be quite useful because if we've got disagreement already on this impact score, we could get that discussed first and revote this one before we move on. But let's say we're happy with this, we've got relatively good consensus, we can check the stats down here to confirm that. So what we'll do is we'll just click to move on. That will close that vote and take us straight to the next criteria, which is likelihood. So I'm going to make this relatively high likelihood, and then we'll move on to control. So let's say on this one, let's be positive and say that we've got very good control, like so. And then our heat map will be immediately replotted. So this is where Matrix is a bit more user friendly because all of this is being done for you immediately, and it's also going to give you some of the stats that you might want, such as risk scores. So let's close out of this view. We'll have a look at some of the others. So what we can do is go straight to an average score for risk scores. So we can see here that B is the risk of most concern for us, so we might have a bit of a chat about that. In terms of how it generates the score, that's definable to an extent. So I've used a fairly simple mechanism where I'm just doing the product of those 3 assessments. So least concerning A, most concerning B. If I close out of that and we go back to the list, you'll see where this is all generated. So if I go into the pop-up list and onto the list editor, this is where I've put my risks in, and these are just text fields. I just happen to have just labelled them as risk A, risk B, but of course you could have had a much longer description against any of these. So it's just pop that in. You can also allocate short names, which might be risk identifiers from your risk register if you do have codes for them. So let's pop something in there, because those can also be plotted onto your heat map, so you can label up if you need to. So everything is generated from here. You'll notice it's currently ordered from the highest score. No, it's not. It's can't remember which one is I set it to reorder by, so let's just do that. Let's do it by risk score, descending, and it will immediately rejig those for us. So we can keep that alphabetical if we need to, or we can reorder by any of the columns here, score being kind of the most obvious choice, I guess. So that's how we work with this one. If we wanted to change the assessments, then we can go into each one of those and reword them as well. But I'm not going to dwell too much. There are other videos that take you through in more detail how to use Matrix. So I just want to finish up on that now and show you the data export that you would get from that one, and also how you might be able to achieve a similar outcome using one of the lower cost alternatives. So let's have a quick look first at the data. So let's export that to Excel. If I wanted to, I can put some information in for my report, so I can give it a name, a venue, and so forth. but I'm just going to stick with all the defaults here and hit export just to give you an idea of what you're going to get. So there's two things. One is exporting all of the data so that we've got all of those stats available to us. The other is that we can export images of all of the graphs that we've shown during our workshop so that you can then import those into your workshop report. But let's look first at the data. So we've got a nice color-coded spreadsheet here, but we've also got a bit of an audit trail. So you can choose whether this is anonymous or not. I've got a mixture here, so I've set some names for some of my participants, and others they've just got keypad numbers, so you can see that either option is available. I set the system to look for 10 keypads. I only voted on 9, so keypad 10 is blank. So there is no problem if somebody can't attend, if a keypad isn't used, it doesn't matter. You can carry on. So on risk A, I'd voted on all 10. And some of the others. This one is the one that we revoted, where I only voted 9. So you can see it hasn't caused any problems at all. And we don't have a lot of data here because we only voted on 4 risks. But let's have a look at the summary as well. So what we've got here is our average score for impact, for likelihood, control, and what the resulting risk score is. There are various text collection boxes as well, so we could have made notes on any of the risks, and we can also assign them to different categories, which means we can show just that one category on our heat map. For example, if we've got a large risk list and we need to cut that down and tackle a category at a time. Quite a lot we can do. But so that's the data export that we're going to get out of Matrix, which hopefully covers most of what people are going to want. And then in terms of images for your report, that's handled under the print manager. So again, I'm just going to leave this on default, but there are various changes that we can make. But let's have a look at what you get by default. So we can see here, if I zoom in, we can see that we've looked at some scatters on this exercise. But we also had some heat maps on there. So you can send all of that out and just include that in a Word document or similar. Again, there's more detail on other videos. So to keep this short, we'll move on from that. When you're using the essential level software, it's designed for simple multiple choice voting. So what you would need is a slide for every assessment and every risk. So I've just done risk A with impact and likelihood. If I wanted to add control, I'd have to have a third slide in order to do that. Same again for risk B. So we'll take those one at a time. What you're not going to get here is any kind of stats or average scores. This is just going to show you how they voted. These are set as percentages. If you wanted to be adding these into a spreadsheet as you go along, you'd need to also show the number of votes for each item, which can be done. So it can show you both things, so the percentage and how many votes to achieve that. If you're going to just export the data and import it to another application afterwards, you're going to get all of that information in the export anyway, so you can keep these fairly simple. So that's how you would vote using Essential, and I'm going to whip through and put some votes in, and then we'll have a quick look at what you can do additionally in the professional level. So if we just start from this one here, and we'll just generate random data for these. So on a scale of 1 to 5, the impact of risk A, and there's our result. And then we move on for the likelihood for risk A. And again, if we wanted control, we would have another slide for that, but I'm going to move straight to risk B, and we'll generate some data there. And finally, the likelihood for risk B. So this does work. You're still getting voting data received, and we can still export that to Excel. So let's go have a very quick look at that. So if I go to voting results, view/export, and it's going to give me a little preview of my voting data for this particular presentation. Even though my matrix slide was in the same slide deck, this is not the way that we export the matrix data. So this is going to start just from this one, slide 3, which was our risk A impact. So we can see we've got those by percentage. We can change that. We can see number of votes for each of those here. We've got a summary sheet which might be useful to you, so you can see how we voted for each item on a scale of 1 to 5 here. And we've still got an audit trail that again could be by participant name if you have professional. If you only have essential, then it will just be keypad numbers. But nonetheless, you've still got all of the data. And what you can see here is I've previously voted on my professional vote. So we've got some extra data. The ones that we've just done now are just these 4 here. If I hit export to Excel, it's going to do exactly that. Put all of this into a workbook for you with multiple sheets to reflect all of these different views that we've looked at. So you can do your data analysis, or you can import that data to another application. So more than possible, but what we haven't got is that nice heat map and the instant ability to see the average scores and to revote the items and replot and so forth. It might be enough if you've got something else to do that. So now let's have a quick look at how you might do it in professional. So what we can do with professional is we can cast votes for multiple impacts all on one slide, and we can get average scores. What we can't see on here is impact and likelihood. All that we can see is our scores for impact, and then we would have another slide for likelihood and another slide perhaps for control. So let's just have a quick look at how that one runs. So what we'll do here is the arrow will guide us as to which risk we're looking at. So obviously we've had to keep the risks very short to fit 18 risks on one slide. So you might do multiple slides instead so that you can have longer risk descriptors, or perhaps you'll just give people a handout that tells them the detail for risk 1. So at the moment we're voting only on impact on a scale of 1 to 5 for risk 1. As soon as we've done risk 1, we can move to risk 2. If we wanted to, we could set this to show us the average scores for each of these as we go along. I've set mine to just wait until I've voted on all of the 18 risks, and then we'll see those compared against each other. So we're just whipping through and doing all of the impact scores. So this is, you can do this with Matrix as well. You can take it one assessment at a time, so you can do all of the risks by only impact, and then you can decide which of those you want to vote likelihood and so forth. But more commonly, we concentrate on a single risk at a time and vote all of those assessments one after another, which of course we can't do using this ppvote professional method of voting. Right, so let's just get the voting data in for risk 18, and then we can see how we did on those. So what I can see here is the highest score was risk 12. So that one is highlighted in red because that would be the most impactful risk in this particular assessment. We can still go in and look at the distribution graphs on this one, but that's really all we can do. We can also export the data to Excel just like we did with the essential votes, but as you can see, this is not quite as dynamic and not quite as visual perhaps as the matrix level software. But let's take one of these that's sitting somewhere in the middle. So for example, let's have a look at risk 14 because that scored 2.9. So did everybody say that that is moderate, or did we have a mix of opinion? So we can go in, drill down into that one, and that is risk 14's distribution chart. So again, it's just not quite as pretty as you saw on the ppvote matrix version. Also, this would look a lot prettier if I'd only had 6 or 7 risks on the slide, because what I could have done is put the graph on the right hand side, the risks on the left hand side, and I wouldn't be plotting a graph straight over some text. But it's really down to how many risks have you got to assess and how many slides are you willing to run, because if I'd split these into 3 slides each with 6 risks, you're never seeing that full side-by-side comparison. But we can see here that actually nobody really, there was only a couple of people, we've got 2 votes here that have said that this is moderate. What we've got is quite a lot of disagreement. We could go through and re-vote these risks, but unlike Matrix, where I can say, well, it's only that risk that I want to do, with Professional, we'd have to re-vote the entire slide. So it's just not quite as friendly for you to do. So what you might do instead is set up spare slides for each of the risks where you just cast a single vote like the essential method, and then you can go in and update your spreadsheet with those individual scores. So a bit more user intervention, I suppose, would be the way to put it. So hopefully that's been helpful in terms of what you can and can't do with the three different levels. So certainly it's more than clear that for me, if I'm running a risk assessment workshop, I would want the matrix tool, but that's because I haven't got something else to do those heat maps for me. So I want one piece of software to do all of the work. But perhaps for you, the scenario is different and something like this would work equally well. We'd be more than happy, of course, to walk through any of this in more detail with you. So you can always get in touch with us if you email sales@clickerpad.com. That's sales@clickerpad.com, or jump on live chat via our website. We'd be able to assist you further and answer any specific questions that you might have.